woke me up in the morning and said, "You're going to meet a prince today."
Elin tells me in the car that I have to do what I do for Jeffrey for Prince Andrew.
I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape, or form am I suicidal. If something happens to me, for the sake of my family, do not let this go away.
Imagine the sheer amount of courage it takes to stand in front of a camera and tell a story that involves the most powerful people on the planet. We're talking about people who don't just have money, but people who have the kind of influence that can make problems and people disappear with a single phone call. Virginia Giuffre sat down for the interview of a lifetime, a moment that should have been the definitive turning point in one of the darkest sagas in modern history. She didn't just give vague accusations. She provided names, dates, and the kind of specific, granular details that only a survivor could know. But then something happened that should sit very heavy with anyone paying attention. Within a tiny 24-hour window of her most explosive testimony going public, everything shifted. The evidence didn't just get disputed, it evaporated. The centerpiece of her truth was a 1,000-page manuscript she had spent months meticulously crafting. This wasn't just a diary, it was a manual of the operation, detailing the inner workings of a global network. It contained the specifics that lawyers and investigators dream of. And yet, in the wake of her public statement, that manuscript vanished from the possession of those who held it. This is a pattern we see over and over again in this world. Truth-tellers reach the peak of their transparency, and then the signal is cut. It's as if there's a recurring glitch in our reality, where the most damaging information simply ceases to exist at the exact moment it becomes a threat to the status quo. But why are we only now starting to connect the dots between these disappearances and the figures who are currently packing their bags? To understand the present, we have to look at the terrifying routine of the past. The way this network functioned wasn't just about high-level crimes. It was about the mundane, daily logistics of maintaining a prison without walls. It was a system built on agendas, handlers, and the calculated silence of the people we are told to trust. And the deeper you go into how that system actually operated, the more you realize that the man at the center of it was just the visible face of a much larger, much more protected machine.
Jeffrey Epstein tells me he owns the Palm Beach Police Department. And I can't remember when he tells me this again, but he told me, "I know where your little brother goes to school." So I mean, like, when you talk about psychological fear, it's not like they put a gun to my head and said, "Do this or die." It was these invisible chains that I talk about that kept you complacent, kept you there.
The world knew Ghislaine Maxwell as a socialite, a woman of culture, and even an ocean conservationist. She moved through the highest circles of power with an ease that most people can't even fathom. But according to the testimony that they tried to bury, her true role was something far more clinical. She functioned as a logistics coordinator, a handler who managed the movement of young girls with the same cold efficiency a property manager uses to schedule apartment viewings. This wasn't a world of chance encounters. It was a world of strict agendas. Virginia described specific mornings where she would be woken up by Maxwell and handed a daily schedule. It was a literal list of who she would meet, where she would go, and what would be expected of her by the time she got there. Imagine being 17 years old and having your entire existence blocked off in a billionaire's calendar like a corporate meeting. This level of organization reveals the true nature of the operation. It wasn't just a series of isolated events. It was a well-oiled machine that had structure, personnel, and a chain of command. Maxwell wasn't just a companion. She was the architect of the routine, the person ensuring that the assets were exactly where they needed to be at the exact right time. This professionalization of human misery is what allowed the network to survive for so long. When you turn a nightmare into a logistics problem, it becomes much easier to manage. It also becomes much easier for the people on the outside to ignore. Maxwell's public persona provided the perfect cover, a protective shell of high society respectability that shielded the operation from any real scrutiny. But even the best constructed covers have cracks, and those cracks started to show when the names of those being scheduled were finally spoken
a
out
lot
loud.
of people involved. It took doctors, psychiatrists, gynecologists, dentists. All these people knew what was going on, hairstylists. I mean, the list goes on. I could keep going on and on and on. Drivers, chauffeurs, butlers, housemaids. It took all of these people turning a blind eye.
One of the most explosive parts of the testimony involved a certain member of the British royal family. Virginia didn't hedge her bets or use vague descriptors. She named Prince Andrew directly, and she did it on camera. She described a specific night in London that pulled back the curtain on how these high-profile encounters were arranged. This wasn't a story told in broad strokes. It was a story of specific venues, specific sections of those venues, and even specific drinks. She detailed going to a club called Tramp, sitting in the VIP section, and the prince himself being the one to provide the alcohol, vodka to be precise. These details matter because they are the markers of truth. Someone constructing a story might forget the brand of spirits or the layout of the dance floor, but someone who lived it carries those details forever. She described him initiating contact, asking her to dance, and the surreal nature of being in that environment while the rest of the world looked on. But the real horror of the story wasn't what happened in the club. It was what happened in the car ride back. That was the moment when the full machinery of the system became visible. Ghislaine Maxwell allegedly told her that the prince was coming back to the house, and Virginia was expected to do for him exactly what she did for the man running the show. In a single sentence, the transaction was laid bare. It was a clear indication that these powerful guests weren't just visitors, they were participants in a shared system of exploitation, one where the boundaries of consent were erased by the weight of a royal title.
I was so young. Ghislaine woke me up in the morning and said, "You're going to meet a prince today." I didn't know at that point that I was going to be to that prince. Prince Andrew came to her house in London, and we went out to Club Tramp. Prince Andrew got me alcohol. It was in the VIP section. I'm pretty sure it was vodka. Prince Andrew was like, "Let's dance together." And Ghislaine said he's coming back to the house. And I want you to do for him what you do for Epstein.
When people hear these stories, the first thing they ask is, why didn't she just leave? It's a natural question, but it ignores the reality of how psychological warfare works. You don't need iron bars to keep someone in a cage if you can convince them that the entire world is the cage. The man at the center of this network didn't rely on physical force. He relied on a calculated, deliberate form of intimidation that made escape feel like an impossibility. He didn't just claim to have wealth, he claimed to own the very systems meant to protect people. He told Virginia point blank that he owned the Palm Beach Police Department. He wasn't hinting at it, he was stating it as a fact of her reality. When you believe that the people who are supposed to help you are actually on the payroll of your captor, the exit sign disappears. But he didn't stop there. He used the most effective tool in the kit of a predator, the threat against family. He mentioned her little brother. He didn't have to scream or pull a weapon. He just calmly let her know that he knew exactly which school her brother attended. That is the detail that should stop anyone in their tracks. It was a reminder that his reach extended far beyond the walls of his estates, and that any move she made would have consequences for the people she loved most. Those are the invisible chains that keep a person complacent. It's a prison without walls, built on the foundation of psychological terror and the total compromise of public authority.
Jeffrey Epstein tells me he owns the Palm Beach Police Department. And I can't remember when he tells me this again, but he told me, "I know where your little brother goes to school." So I mean, like, when you talk about psychological fear, it's not like they put a gun to my head and said, "Do this or die." It was these invisible chains that I talk about that kept you complacent, kept you there.
Curious how the stars keep their glow and their homes A-list ready? I've handpicked the top-rated skincare, home, and wellness essentials favored by Hollywood's elite in my official Amazon storefront. Click the link in my description to shop the Celeb Curio collection today. When Virginia decided to speak, she didn't just give an interview, she decided to create a permanent record. She worked on a manuscript that went through several iterations, eventually becoming a structured account of the names, dates, and locations that defined the network's operations. According to her co-author, this material was detailed enough to serve as a roadmap for any investigator or journalist trying to trace the exact shape of the crimes. But as we know, the version that eventually reached the public was incomplete. The most damaging chapters, the ones that detailed encounters with people she hadn't yet named publicly, simply vanished. They disappeared right around the same time she did, in that same 24-hour window where the narrative was being aggressively managed. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a surgical strike against the evidence.
Virginia Giuffre, the most prominent victim of the late convicted Jeffrey Epstein, took her own life on Thursday. This is just weeks after she made headlines for saying that she had days to live after she claimed to have been hit by a bus.
If you look at the timeline, it becomes even more suspicious. She gives her final interview, and within a day, she is found dead. The official report says she offed herself, but the timing is almost too perfect for the people her testimony would have destroyed, especially when you consider that weeks earlier, she had survived being hit by a bus and had publicly posted that she was not suicidal. She even told her therapist and her GP to keep an eye out, specifically because she knew evil people wanted her quieted. She was building a paper trail in real time because she knew the threat was real. And yet the world was told a very different story once the lights went out.
I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape, or form am I suicidal. I have made this known to my therapist and GP. If something happens to me, for the sake of my family, do not let this go away. Too many evil people want to see me quieted.
And disappearing evidence isn't restricted to just one case. It seems to repeat whenever someone gets too close to the inner workings of these power structures. Take the story of Stephen Twitch, the DJ and executive producer who was a staple of the Hollywood elite for years. To the public, he was the face of joy and energy, but reports suggest that behind the scenes, he was starting to see the dark reality of the industry he helped build. Before he was found in that motel room, rumors began to circulate that he had left behind recordings and written material that detailed what he had witnessed during his time on one of the most successful shows in daytime TV. This material allegedly described a world that was completely at odds with the kind image the show projected to the world. It was a crack in the Hollywood facade, and just like Virginia's manuscript, those recordings have never surfaced. The circumstances of his passing were also surrounded by strange details. He checked in under his own name, switched his phone to airplane mode, and reportedly left a note that alluded to challenges he couldn't overcome. But the specific content of that note was never fully shared with the public. There's a theory that he was trying to signal something using a specific coded language that has appeared in other documents related to this broader network. This recurring mechanism of a person speaking out, followed by a sudden silencing and the disappearance of evidence, is becoming impossible to ignore. It suggests that the system doesn't just protect individuals, it protects the entire structure from any form of transparency.
On Tuesday morning, he had not checked out. Checkout time was 11 a.m. So management went to knock on the door around 11:15, and it was then that a housekeeper discovered his body in the room.
He was going through so much, and he was hiding so much, and there must have been a lot of shame in that. And he was wrestling with a lot inside himself, and he was trying to self-medicate and cope with all those feelings because he didn't want to put it on anyone.
Fast forward to today, and the atmosphere has changed. We're no longer in an era of mere speculation. The unsealing of the flight logs and the release of internal emails has shifted the conversation from if to who. And as the names are finally emerging from the shadows, we are witnessing a literal exodus of high-profile figures from the United States. The timing is what gives it away. It's not about political shifts or personal preferences. The departures began almost the moment the file's release schedule was announced. We've seen major stars and media moguls listing their mansions and moving to places like rural England, claiming they have no intention of ever returning. They aren't waiting to see what the files contain. They already know. The most prominent example is the daytime talk show host who, along with her wife, has reportedly fled to the UK permanently. The public story is that the move was motivated by the election, but people within the industry's inner circles have confirmed that the planning for this departure began long before the results were known. When you line up the timing of the files, the timing of the departures, and the timing of the silencing of key witnesses, the picture becomes clear. This isn't a coincidence. It's a strategic retreat by people who know that the protective shell around the network is finally starting to crack.
Ellen DeGeneres and her wife, Portia de Rossi, have reportedly fled the US, bound for the UK, after Donald Trump's landslide victory. Numerous publications are reporting the couple have left the United States permanently. There are also reports the couple have put their Montecito mansion on the market. Entertainment publication Wrap has the exclusive story and said, Ellen DeGeneres and wife Portia de Rossi have moved to rural England, put their Montecito estate on the market, and plan to never return to the United States, telling friends the election of Donald Trump was their primary motivation.
What's coming out in the leaked emails and internal records is even more disturbing than the rumors. They show a man who was so confident in his protection that he discussed his crimes casually with colleagues in professional communications. He described his private island in writing as an aquarium full of girls, a chilling look into how he viewed the people he was exploiting. This wasn't the behavior of a man who thought he would ever be held accountable. He was completely confident that the legal, political, and financial systems around him would continue to serve as a protective shell. And for decades, he was right. The emails show deep ties to entertainment, fashion, academia, and the highest levels of politics. He used a coded language that allowed him to operate in plain sight, a checkout system that masked the true nature of his transactions. Even 7 months before his final arrest, he was discussing his legal issues with a level of nonchalance that borders on the insane. He wasn't worried about the police or the courts because he believed he was part of a system that was above the law. But the files are finally out, the names are in them, and the world is finally starting to see the reality that Virginia and others spent years trying to get us to believe. The aquarium is no longer a secret, and the people who were swimming in it are now scrambling to get as far away from the evidence as possible.
I have spent the last 17 years in my own prison for what she, Jeffrey, and all the co-conspirators did to me. I was raped repeatedly. I was raped 3 times a day sometimes. And I was not the only girl on that island. There was a constant stream of girls being over and over and over again. And yes, Ghislaine must be in prison because I've been in hell and back for the last 17 years.
In 27 for me.
I was 10 years old when Liz Stein was being raped. I was 10. That is how long this trafficking ring has been going.
Virginia Giuffre told us everything. She gave us the names, the places, and the mechanics of the operation. She described the VIP sections, the car rides, and the daily agendas. She told us how the system worked, who ran it, and exactly what it cost to know the truth. She believed that if she spoke clearly enough and publicly enough, it would finally matter. And in the end, it cost her everything.
I want to start by saying it's not how Jeffrey died, but it's how he lived. And we need to get to the bottom of everybody who was involved with that.
We are now sitting here parsing through the fragments of a story that they tried desperately to delete. We are looking at a book that is missing its most important chapters and listening for a voice that was taken away before it could finish the sentence. The evidence has a habit of disappearing, and the people closest to that evidence have a habit of ending up gone. But the pattern is now visible, and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
They've been accused by a multitude of women of a multitude of wrongdoings, and nothing has happened to any of them.
The question that remains, the one that no one in a position of authority seems in any hurry to answer, is simple. Who made sure she wouldn't be able to tell us anymore? Who is still benefiting from the silence? The files are out, and the names are emerging, but the network is still fighting to stay in the shadows. This story isn't over. It's just moving into the light, and it's up to us to make sure that it doesn't get buried again. The truth shouldn't have a 24-hour expiration date, and the people who fought to tell it deserve to have their voices heard, even after the signal has been cut.